afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and welcome to another episode of ISTJ Info Dumping, the show where we wear our hearts on our, I guess that's a blank sleeve. So, on our rib cage, which is where the heart technically belongs, although in this case it would be in the rib cage. But then, I wouldn't want my precious banjo and kazooie shirt to be inside my rib cage. Dang, you intuitives have some weird sayings. Like, where do you even get these from, anyway? Speaking of intuitives, today's episode we're going to be giving an ISTJ's perspective on a particular subgenre of Myers-Briggs types known as the NTs. No, that does not stand for neurotypicals. This time, in the Myers-Briggs contexts, it stands for intuitive thinkers. In other words, every Myers-Briggs type that has intuition and thinking in their letters. Now, just because they have those letters doesn't necessarily mean they're going to share the same intuitive and thinking functions. But there are certain tendencies that all of them have that I'm going to be giving an ISTJ's perspective on. So, for those of you that don't know, intuitive thinkers have a habit of being very into the world of calculations and simulations and thinking ahead. They tend to view everything as a system or a pattern of thought. And then they get into this speculation of how does this system work? How do I make it a reality? And they live in the world of what ifs and possibilities, and it just makes my brain hurt just trying to think about it. And admittedly, they go about it in different ways. You take an INTP and an INTJ. The INTP is going to be more focused on what makes the system work. The INTJ is going to say, what will make my idea work in a system? So there's a little bit of a difference there. But one thing that they seem to all share in common is they're so socially awkward, but in a likable way. Like, it's almost kind of adorable how much they seem to struggle with basic concepts like saying hello. To them, it seems like this impossible ordeal that they've been hit with the world's most tough math problem. I could have said that with better grammar. And to a certain extent, every Myers-Briggs type can and will struggle with social interaction. No one is perfect. Even the extroverts have moments where they could have just put their foot in their mouth. They didn't have to say as much as they did. I mean, you've seen how ENFPs accidentally flirt with people that they're just trying to be friends with. So there's an example of where the extroverts can mess up. But in the NTs' case, because they're so used to thinking ahead and formulating all these various ideas and systems, it leads to them not having a very good grasp of what is real. In fact, a lot of them end up with this very morally relativistic view of the world where they question what even is truth. Are we even real? And it leads to them having a lot of existential crises. Something which I am very grateful has not happened to me yet. Probably never will, because I have sensing too high up in my function stack. But the thing is that NTs, they like to think so hard about the future, and a lot of them think that they have every detail planned. But then when it comes to a social interaction, suddenly all of that planning, all of that speculating just goes, and they're just like, the opposite gender, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And sometimes they don't even panic that much. They just stop. Like, I've seen some INTJs where they're just like, hi. And it's so funny how they don't even grasp the basics of social conventions, which to them, why would they? They're not sensing types. They're not going to be thinking about what has been effective in the past and what is. They're going to be thinking about what will be. And in the moment, the person in front of them isn't a future projection. It isn't something that could be. It's something that is. Being intuitives, naturally they're going to have problems with living in the moment. I mean, every intuitive type struggles with this to a certain extent. They are always thinking ahead. Like, I was on the phone with my buddy Danielle the other day, who's an ENFP. And she was like, oh my gosh, Paul, I can't wait for our next hangout. And it was just so cute how she was focusing so hard on an upcoming event that she was having a hard time focusing on what we were talking about in that moment. But in the NT's case, they don't have the feeling function to sort out, okay, what will be the polite thing to do? What will be the sensible, approachable thing to do? Instead, they think, how do I define this? What does this mean? But it leads to them overthinking everything, so they end up considering too many variables. Now, I'm not pretending that I know what's going through their heads. If anything, I think that this is completely foreign. Because even though I myself have my moments or I'm just completely clueless how to react, at the same time, for me, being a dominant introverted sensor, I can rely on the glory of the familiar. So I can say, okay, well, there was a system that was devised, don't know when, but it's the system that I've grown up with, called common courtesy. And generally in common courtesy, you greet people that you're talking to. So that's a basis. You say, hello, my name is Paul, how do you do? And then you also make sure you give an adequate goodbye, saying like, it was nice seeing you, I hope you have a nice day. These are social courtesies that you don't have to naturally grasp. As long as you know the words, then you can pretty much do it. NTs, they can grasp that, but a lot of times, from my perspective, it seems like they don't want to grasp it, or at least if they do, they forget about it the next day because that was back then. That was too much into using my sensing, especially if they're the dominant sensors, which are the INTJs and the ENTPs. They're going to be like, don't bog me down with stuff that's happened before. I gotta think big, think futuristic. That's not going to get them anywhere. They'll have to think of a new way to socialize. And then things just keep going out the window because how could you have not calculated this in advance? Now, if it seems like I'm ragging on them, that's definitely not my intention. Well, I definitely think some of them are a bit arrogant, like the ENTJs and INTPs can be a bit like, I am better than everyone else, and I am far superior to your simplistic ways, but then they can't handle a basic conversation. That's where I think, their ego is going to get the better of them one of these days. I remember my family and I were watching an episode of The Waltons a couple of days ago, and there was this kid who I'm pretty sure he was an INTP. He was so intelligent that he was in college by the age of 16, but he had no social skills. He would just blurt out things that he liked without asking anyone if they were interested. And then he would blatantly criticize everyone if their beliefs weren't perfectly aligned with his. Then he'd say, like, well, this is so easy. How do you not grasp this? He didn't know how to say thank you. He didn't know how to say hi. He didn't look at people when talking to them. And I was just like, how can you be that dense? That's like another layer of social awkwardness. In fact, a lot of people say that it's pretty common for NTs to be on the autism spectrum because of how completely out of it they are from the real world and what's expected in a social context. That's not to say all of them are, but they can definitely come across like it when you take the types like, say, the SFs, who are living in the world of social conventions. To them, they don't really think of anything but how to harmonize with other people, especially the SFJs. So, as far as advice to give the NTs on how to be less clunky, I don't know if that would be a wise endeavor, because I can imagine the NTs flooding my comment section saying, you don't know what you're talking about, Paul, or, I mean, there have been a few that have been more polite than usual lately, so I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking this. But generally speaking, when NTs take advice, they tend to forget the advice the very next minute. Like, my best friend, when he asks me for advice, a lot of times he has to write down what I said so that when he leaves the next day, it won't just go out of his head and move on to the next thing. So, I don't even know why I'm bothering to give advice, but if I had to give one particular thing, get your notepads out, NTs, because we all know you're not going to remember this the next minute. You're going to move on to the next big thing in life, is at least say, "How are you doing?" and "Have a nice day" when you enter and exit conversations. It's not that hard. It's not that taxing on your IQ. In fact, a lot of you have such high IQs that you're probably off the charts. This can't possibly be hard for you. Now, admittedly, I'm not an extroverted feeler. That's my seventh function. I'm not particularly good at this stuff either. But at least I remember the rules of how to engage in conversation, and I've trained myself over time to get better at naturally grasping the social environment. And I think you guys can too with enough practice. Now, what if you happen to have a crush, or if you happen to really enjoy being around intuitive thinking types and are wondering, "Oh my gosh, how can I handle someone who is so oblivious or rude or both?" And as someone who is currently struggling at that myself, I can say, I don't know. But one thing that I've noticed that seems to be effective with the NTs is when you prove yourself to be at their level. So, like, if they're really smart at something and you prove that you're also smart, you'll gain their respect. Also, if they pose a question that they think has no answer and you give them the answer, then they're going to be satisfied. One particular example of where I impressed an NT is I did a video on Rational Typology's channel where I talked about my stance on religion with an INTJ who was non-religious. And some person commented something along the lines of, well, who created God? If you can't answer that, move over to atheism. And I said, well, we all accept that time existed, and so does space. I'm pretty sure there's no one in the universe that denies that. So therefore, how did time begin? If time had a beginning, then what created time? The answer is God, because God is outside of time. And if time was created, then it would imply that God therefore had no beginning. And he just said, "You know what? I like you." So that can be something that can impress them. Then again, having answers like that doesn't come naturally for most people, especially not the SF types, because they don't tend to think very deeply, and even if they do, they're not particularly good at using their thinking function. So I guess at the end of the day, just be nice to them. At the end of the day, everyone desires basic human niceties. I don't think even the most hardened, inferior feeling NT types are going to want you to be totally mean to them. I think they'll actually appreciate it if you show patience, or even if you show a term of endearment, such as, "Aw, you're only partially socially awkward today." I think they're going to really like that. They might get a little bit defensive, but then you can just give them a little jab and say, "Oh, I'm just messing with you. The ENTPs love to troll, so if they can dish it out, they have to be able to take it as well. I don't know if this episode was particularly helpful or informative to you guys, but I know that I'm the only ISTJ that really, really, really gets into talking about Myers-Briggs. So I thought it would be nice if, instead of talking about myself for a change, that I could talk about other Myers-Briggs types. A lot of you seem to really like it when I do that. One of you even suggested that I should make a video on INTPs. Well, I'm holding off on that until I have more nice things to say about them. But I do have a couple of INTPs in my life that are actually really polite. So I'm waiting to see if that's more of a normality, and that the rude INTPs I've encountered in my life are the exceptions, not the norm, because inferior feeling is very agitating. So I really want to be proven wrong. I want to be proven that these types are capable of being polite and considerate and caring and loving, possibly even empathetic and sympathetic, but let's not hope for too much. So with that, thank you very much for watching. If I somehow didn't make this episode good enough for you guys, let me know in the comments section what I could have done better. What are your thoughts on NTs? Are you an NT yourself and could relate to what I was saying? Or have you developed your weaker functions and actually was able to hold your own in a conversation? Let me know down below, and until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and oh hi! Bye.